Thank you, Mr. Chair. On September 29th, 2022, the Fed established the pilot climate scenario analysis exercise to measure and manage climate-related financial risks. However, the covered institutions already measure relevant financial risks and do not need enhancement and help promised by the Fed. I'm not an accountant, but I had a roommate in college that was, and he was studying to be an accountant. And I just remember the basic principles of accounting, which was a book about this thick. It was very principled. There's certain things you do when it comes to accounting and certain things you don't. There's certain things you consider and other things that you would never consider. And my colleague who just spoke kind of reminded me that, when it comes to ESG, or as he framed it, ESG month, there should be some variance in there. And I've always thought, not only as a state legislator, but now as a member of Congress, that, there are certain things we can do voluntarily that if we want to move forward, if we have questions about the environment or social governance that are important, I think that should be factored in. But it shouldn't change the basic principles of the way the boardroom works. And I think that's why, not only in this committee, but in other committees that I serve on, the focus on ESG is because we don't know what the impact would be if we kind of change the rules of where we're at on many of these things. So the Fed has stated that increased capital requirements form the holistic capital review, and the Basel III endgame requirements will be implemented in the long term. So, to Mr. Gibson, does the perceived long-term implementation of increased capital requirements contemplate the potential to turn climate scenarios into regular climate stress testing?
That's not part of the current work plan, no.
And have there been any discussions about increasing capital requirements on banks over the next several years, and then doing so again under the climate stress testing regime?
No, the climate scenario analysis exercise doesn't have any implications for capital requirements.
Right. And in January 2023, Federal Reserve research paper titled, "What are the large global banks doing about climate change?" the authors wrote, "Our paper is closely related to a report by Influence Map 2022. Influence Map is a London-based think tank devoted to the mission to, quote, hold the corporate and finance sectors accountable for climate performance." I mean, it's just a completely separate agenda from what anybody should be considering when it comes to finance. And in attempts to use the name and kind of these shame tactics and the way it's funded by several entities, including Climate Works Foundation, which in turn is funded by several entities, including Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the High Tide Foundation, amongst others. There's an agenda there. There's absolutely an agenda, and if we don't look at this clearly, I think we're all going to fall for this game of propaganda and a movement away from what I said earlier, the basic foundation of accounting principles. So, to Mr. Gibson, is the Federal Reserve following the lead of outside international think tanks and advocates and activists of climate policy change in efforts to try and pressure or push financial institutions toward climate policy directions right now?
No.
And the final thing I'll just say, because I'm going to run out of time. There is absolutely a pressure. I've spoken to CFOs and to CEOs, and sometimes they're even unaware how their own corporations have responded to this. I remember we had a dinner that I attended in which I asked the CEO, tell me what you think about CSG. And he said, it's not something we're involved in. It's not something that we talk about at any of our corporate meetings. But the fact of the matter is, 2 days later, I had a staff person come to me and say, look at the website. Their website had a full 2 pages on ESG. So it really raised a question in my mind. are some of the corporate leaders even aware of kind of what's going on, even within their own companies? I think the answer to that is no. I yield back.
Gentleman's time